Hi, I'm Craig, and I help veterans go from feeling stuck and unseen after service to living with confidence, connection, and purpose so that they can thrive in civilian life and relationships. So, vets and families, let's do an intro overview of what this hearing is about, and let's dig in deep about who the panel members are. Let's dig in deep to what was said, and let's make sure that we accurately and adequately represent all of the perspectives that were at the hearing. And so that's what we're going to do. All right, so first one is VA Disability System Facts, Misconceptions, and Reform. And the content of this first part was the Congressional Hearing examined VA Disability System fairness, accuracy, and efficiency. Remember, this is not the only time that Congress has chosen to kind of do this. Okay, there are always hearings about the VA, particularly more about the VHA and the healthcare system and things of that nature, and whether or not that system has in the past served veterans in the best possible way. And so this VA hearing is no different. But again, it was really brought about by that whole Washington Post article. So in this particular video, I'm just going to try to represent as best I can everybody's point of view and perspective. So the focus is the media claims of widespread fraud versus statistical reality. And the witnesses were the VA, the VA Inspector General's office, the Paralyzed Veterans of America, Disabled American Vets, Veterans of Foreign Wars, all those heads of VSOs, and then Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Gade. Okay, and then the central themes were to protect the integrity of the VA system, support veterans' earned benefits, and to highlight rare fraud and systemic inefficiencies. Okay, let's jump in. Let's dive in. All right. Now, here were the VAIG and VSO perspectives. All right. Primarily, the VAIG and VSO wanted oversight, reality, and veteran advocacy. Those were the themes of kind of their perspectives. And the content was from Cheryl Mason, who was with the VAIG. And this is really important because the IG, as all of you know, their responsibility is to investigate fraud, waste, and abuse, um, particularly in all areas of the government. But then each governmental agency has their specific watchdog, so to speak, to make sure that the IG investigates all complaints, and they get a lot of complaints. But Ms. Cheryl Mason said that fraud was less than 4% of the investigations and mostly targets the VA and not veterans. So the fraud claims mostly target the VA. These are just the facts that I am expressing to you. These fraud claims are mostly VA fraud claims and not veterans themselves. That's an important point. Jeremy Villanueva from Paralyzed Veterans of America said that reform is needed in CMP exams and DBQ oversight. And listen, remember, this is why I say to you, all of you guys, let's be current, accurate, and complete, because these things are reviewed. These CMP exams and DBQs, these things get reviewed for the efficiency and efficacy of them. Okay, so it's important that yours is correct. All right, John Ritzer from the Disabled American Vets says that fraud is less than 0.01% of the overall access of vets to VA benefits. And he says media misrepresentation damages the trust of the public in veterans and their service. Okay. What he's saying is you get all these articles out here, all these different people saying all this stuff about vets. It erodes the trust in the America's ability to be able to staff a fighting force, which we need a fighting force. What he's saying is if you put the narrative out here that veterans are just out here scamming the government for benefits, then the public trust is going to diminish because folks are going to be like, well, Am I paying my taxes for veterans to scam VA benefits they haven't earned, or for conditions that they don't have? And that was Mr. Ritzer's argument. Ryan Gallucci, who all over the web has been getting quite a bit of praise from veterans, says that the disability system equals a sacred contract and that invisible injuries are real. Remember, he was the one who said that when we raise our right hand and say that we will serve our country, we understand the gravity and the danger of serving our country. But at the same time, what he's saying is we are promised that if we go into battle, right, if something happens to us, then our families will be taken care of through the VA disability, through the VA benefit system. And then if we are wounded or injured, then we should be taken care of through VA disability and compensation. So that was his point as a representative of the VAW, VFW. Okay, so let's go over some common panel themes. All right. Systemic issues and shared solutions. That's the first one. Some of the content was that the media is misrepresenting. They're sensationalizing fraud narratives, and that those narratives are misleading. There was a lot of discussion around this, and these are actual things that are being talked about in these upper echelons, right? So the actual fraud reality is statistically negligible, and yes, that there is oversight needed. Okay, the resource needs are staffing, qualified examiners, and updated technology. Listen, these are things that, quite frankly, veterans have been complaining about for many years. It's really interesting that this congressional hearing is coming out of someone pointing the finger at veterans trying to take advantage of the system, when I know for a fact these are things that veterans have been complaining of for many years. Um, I tell I tell people this all the time, and that is when you go see a CMP examiner, or when you go talk to somebody at any VA facility, depending on the day, you'll get something different, right? So we always talk about the level of consistency in CMP examiners, the level of consistency for VSRs and RVSRs, for raters and all these kind of things, how there really isn't a standard process by which they go by. Now, there are job descriptions, there are um, there are regulations, there's statutory law, there's all of these things that veteran examiners and people who are staffed at the VA, VBA, and VHA are supposed to abide by. They're supposed to abide by those things. Okay. Um, but listen, on any given day, this is no exaggeration, I can line up 25 veterans and ask each of one of them how their CMP exam went, how their interviews went, for whether that for mental health assessment by a mental health examiner or physical examination, how their appointments went, and I will get a different story from 25. I can get a different story depending on the day from 25 different veterans. Hey, what kind of feedback did you get from on your decision letter, right? Based on the evidence that you submitted. 25 different answers. So there's been an issue with the consistency of the VA system itself that veterans have complained of. It's interesting and fascinating to see that this now rises to the level of national attention, as fingers are being pointed at the veterans themselves. So the moral imperative is that VA disability equals an earned benefit, not an entitlement. That we earned a right to the benefits that we are owed for sacrificing our bodies, literally, your body's government property while you're in the military, sacrificing your body to serve and to honor your country. So let's talk about um, let's talk about Lieutenant Colonel Gade, Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Gade. Let's talk about him. Okay, now listen. What we do over here on this channel is we do our very best to make sure that we are fair to everyone, and we're going to be fair to Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Gade. Whether in agreement or disagreement, it's important to be fair. He has his opinion, and his opinion is protected by the First Amendment. That's what free speech is all about. Hey, that's what content creation is all about. Everybody gets to have their opinion. Everybody gets to say what is on their mind within reason, of course. But Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Gade is no exception. So, hey, sir, just want you to know that I'm being fair to you as I was to all of the other panel members. So if you're watching this, I'm trying to represent your position as best I can. I know there's a lot of people saying a lot of things about him online, but that's not how we do it over here. We show respect and we judge the words that people say based on how they relate to the topic that they are discussing. That's what we're going to do with Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Gade, as we have done with all the rest of the panelists. So, Lieutenant Colonel Gade um, purports a reform-focused perspective. Um, he wants us to go from dependency to thriving. This is what he calls Gade's vision. And the content of that vision is that the problem lies in current system incentive. The current system incentivizes illness, meaning veterans are getting paid to be sick, inactivity, and disability identity. And his evidence that he submitted was that 450,000 new disability recipients versus 50,000 combat wounded recipients that's an inequity. And I actually looked up those numbers, and he is, for the most part, correct. Rising claims for easily exaggerated conditions. And then his reform principles under the systems that he proposes are that employment equals critical mental health intervention. In other words, what Lieutenant Colonel Gade is saying is that when a veteran, and he stated this in the hearing, and if you haven't watched the hearing all the way through, it would greatly benefit you if you did. Hey, listen, power through it, right? Drink a cup of coffee or something, right? Even if you want to let it play as background. Well, I don't think you should do that. I think you should actually listen to the hearing, because some of the things that they're saying are going to affect, may very well affect your benefits, your ability to get benefits, these kinds of things, right? So you want to make sure that you listen to that hearing, maybe take some notes. All right, do it when you're very alert. That's what you're going to want to do. All right. So what he's saying is that when a veteran is transitioning from military to civilian service, what he's saying is the thing that veteran needs the most is um, the dignity of work, the dignity of having something to do, like having a task, right? And he says that's what gives that veteran hope. And what he's saying is we reduce that dignity, or we make the veteran feel as though they are not a part of society if we continually pay them for their illness or pay them for disability. What he's saying is we perpetuate that when we do it. All right. Just talking about what Lieutenant Colonel Gade said at the hearing, right? Just trying to represent him as fair as possible. Okay. And he says we should shift from a disabled identity, quote unquote, to resilience and purpose. And then he says we should compensate only disabling service connected conditions, and then we should expand care access. Remember, he was the one who said that we should take he's and the way he said it was, he said, you know, he says, ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, I am not proposing this as an idea. But just a thought, if we took every veteran who was rated at 60% or below, and we shifted those funds, by shifting those funds, what he means is cut payment to those veterans, put it back in the treasury, and take the money from that treasury and put it into what he calls healthcare infrastructure and employment infrastructure for veterans. And he says if we did that, it would be about $20 billion that they could put into that. That's what he said. So what he's saying is compensate only disabling service-connected conditions and then expand healthcare access to all veterans, right? He wants to shift that money to what he feels is more appropriate means, okay? And his call to action is to restore veterans meaning, work, and hope. And we talked about that a little bit before. Um, I think what he was trying to say was we don't he doesn't want veterans to have the identity of just living off of government benefit, but he wants veterans to be able to say, hey, listen, I still have meaning, I still have value, I still have purpose in finding my work. So this is the hopefully fair perspective for Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Gade. Um, and hopefully this is something that will represent him in a fashion that, is fair. Will represent him in a fashion that, really, really talks about um, his points in a fair and objective manner. Okay. And so last thing we'll talk about in this video is some key takeaways and policy implications. I think this whole thing wants to go toward a more fair, efficient, and empowering VA system. And the content of that is that fraud does exist, but it's rare. And the misperceptions tend to harm veterans more than help them. Again, we're talking about the Washington Post article. And we're also talking about, I think there was another article that was written. And there's been several pieces of content made about veterans and about, just really just recently about veterans and fraud in the VA system and those kinds of things. Okay. So we want to strengthen oversight, staffing, and technology to ensure fair processing, promote thriving, productive lives through incentives, not dependency, and consider structural reform, treat and care without incentivizing false claims. And the goal is to balance integrity, compassion, and opportunity for all veterans, which is something that everybody should agree with. Okay, those words, integrity, compassion, and opportunity for all veterans, being enveloped back into society in a way that serves a dignified purpose is something that everybody should want. And another thing that everybody should want is to make sure that veterans benefits are protected for the ailments, the current, accurate, and complete and true ailments that they are facing. So that is the roundup of the initial piece of the panel and kind of where everybody was coming from, what everybody's viewpoint was, and the summary of everybody's testimony and kind of the perspective and the place that they were coming from. So we're going to get way deeper in this. Trust me, we're going to get way deeper into this. But this serves as an intro video. And I hope that you were able to get something out of this and something that's beneficial. So hang around with me, stick with me. I'm going to cover this in a fair way. I'm going to cover this in an accurate way. And I'm telling you, you're not going to get anybody else who covers it like this. And I'm not saying that just because I'm better than anyone. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying most people that you see covering this are going to be maybe covering it in an edgy way because veterans are really upset right now. But if you want to see kind of a breakdown of what really happened that day at the panel in just a very objective way, this is just what people said, right? This is just a summary of what people said, right? Whether you agree or disagree with them, right? Whether you're with them or whether you're against, whether you're for or against the reduction of benefits, or if you want a more nuanced perspective, you're somewhere in the middle. This is just a summary of what everybody says, so that you can be, informed, and so that you can make the very best decision that you need to make, and so that you can make sure that no matter what the benefit system looks like, that you're submitting a current, accurate, and complete claim. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching. If you want any more information about the subject of this series, be sure to check out the playlist right here. And remember, live royally and live well. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.